Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Gibson Show, where today I am joined by NA Siege royalty. We are joined by Supr Seth, the GM of Soniqs. Seth, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Just getting everybody situated for this boot camp for SI and Siege. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Have you got used to being introduced as the GM of Soniqs now, as opposed to competitive player for Soniqs?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't done too many interviews since I've become GM, so I haven't gotten used to it yet. No.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll be holding that title for a long time. But has the temptation to play ever come back, or are you happy now with your current role as GM and developing the Soniqs?
No. To be honest, after Invitational of last year, I would have stopped playing then. But the team asked me to keep playing just because we didn't find there were any suitable replacements, and then we had like a really bad stage one because it was kind of like, I mean, as we saw with TSM as well, and a lot of teams, it was just like too much at once on the schedule, so there was like no time to kind of, I guess, reset. So everybody had a bad stage, and I decided like I wasn't going to retire off of like a horrible stage. So then obviously we made the major again, and we were able to obviously find good replacements with Geo and Gunner, actually.
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the interview, but I want to kick off and talk about the closed quals that just finished. You obviously had a co-stream of that, and really it gave the community one last chance in this competitive calendar year to see those teams play. And SSG went ahead and managed to secure that last spot for NA. Based on what you'd seen over the weekend and what you'd seen over the course of the year, do you think that SSG, done enough over the year, especially with one of your old teammates and, Yeti playing for them? Are you happy for them qualifying?
I mean, yeah, obviously they're the team I was rooting for, just because obviously I do have the connection to Yeti from teaming with him for almost 2 years. To be honest, I didn't think before they got Yeti that they were good enough to be an SI team, but I think Yeti has obviously helped them. I mean, we even saw that with them making the last major. So I think they're deserved to go, and I expect them to perform decently well too.
So I want to talk a little bit about that, letting a player go, because obviously Yeti said he came to you for advice. Whenever he left the team, he was like, Super, I've got an offer on the table from SSG, and basically told me you said that you should go for it. Is it hard as a player or a general manager to A, make the decision that you're going to move a player on, and B, did you find it, difficult then, as I'd say, let me guess, recommending him to go to a rival team like SSG?
I mean, it's always hard in the aspect of moving on from a player, especially, this was kind of a circumstance that won't happen much anymore, but it's a player that I personally teamed with and had like, we won NAL together. We had like a great run at SI. So we had like some shared memories. So obviously that's tough. It's never easy to, in a sense, bench or release a player, because, you're kind of like, I mean, you're taking away their job essentially. But beyond that, no, I always want what's best for our players or my friends. And, out of the options that Xander had at that time, I thought SSG was clearly the best option. And we had told him that we weren't going to get in the way of, we weren't going to seek a buyout or anything for him. He was just free to, if he could get on a team, to go, because, at the end of the day, that was a situation where we made a pretty quick decision to go for Geo once we learned he was available. Xander didn't really have much notice, or didn't really expect it. And so I thought it was fair to be like, hey, we know this is kind of a shitty situation. We're going to help we're going to do our best to make sure that this is right for you. And, I think Yeti is, I think he would say he's very happy on SSG.
Yeah, I think basically what you're saying is you hope he has a really good, happy career at SSG, except for when they play against you guys, if it comes to that in SI.
We're never worried about playing SSG.
So let's talk about your career then. Obviously, you moved into Siege very early on. You'd played competitively in other games. Rewinding back to 2017, what was it about Siege that kind of drew your attention as a game that you wanted to play in?
To be honest, I had played like Rainbow Six Black Arrow, Rainbow Six Vegas, Rainbow Six Vegas 2, and Vegas 1 and 2 were like MLG at the time, which has now become the COD League, basically. It's run by the same people. Um, and so I just always had an interest in playing the Rainbow Six series from when I was a kid. And obviously, when Siege came out, I mean, in 2018, I was like 28. So obviously, I was like no longer a young lad like playing against everybody, but I still played games. I still had the time, so I was like, hey, because at the Vegas games, I was one of the best players, I would say. So for me, it was like, oh, I could play with some of my old friends and like hang out here and play. So I picked it up on Xbox. I think it's Xbox One, or I don't even remember at this point. I haven't played console in so long, and I played Pro League Season 1 of Xbox, and I was just like, you know what? I really don't like this game on Xbox. Siege was completely different from the old Rainbow Six series. And to be honest, there were like a lot of issues on console that I just didn't like. And so I just stopped playing completely. And then, they essentially got rid of the console league. And I was like, hey, I guess this is, I could play it on PC. No, that sounds cool. So I got a PC, first time ever, and it's not really that fair for me because it's first time ever for a 28-year-old playing on a PC. And yeah, I just ended up being pretty good. I played a lot with Gio, who's obviously now on our team, and King George. The first thing we did, because it was right after Canadian won the first invitational, so we went to PC, and the first thing we did was just copy all of Canadian settings, which is pretty funny in hindsight.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it worked out.
And then you look at the players that you actually played with when you kicked off. You already spoke about like King George, Gio. You played a little bit with Bosco as well. You played a bit with Goddess. And this was all before you went for Soniqs. And what the impressive thing is, a lot of that core group of players that you played with are still competing at a really high level. Why do you think that org was able to bring so much talent with longevity in at the right time? Like, how did those decisions come to place? Because you look back at the players competing back in 2017-18, a lot of them are gone. A lot of them have left the scene entirely.
Yeah, I mean, on Era, it was kind of, I'm not going to pretend like Era was some great org. I think they got in trouble afterward because they weren't paying their Call of Duty team or something, and they've essentially disbanded. And at the time, for me, it was something to do on the side while I was going to school, doing other things. We were getting paid, I think, $800 a month. So it's, you're not playing that thinking like, hey, this is my career. You're playing that like, oh, this is like something fun you could do on the side. And I remember I knew who Bosco was because we both came from console, and we actually didn't really get along on console. And we like scrimmed against his team, and I was like, we should pick up this guy. And they were like, didn't even know who he was basically. And I told them, I was like, this guy is like one of the best console players, and he's going to be good on this game. So we ended up just picking him up, which obviously he became arguably the best NA player of all time. But yeah, I don't think the org honestly had anything to do with it. If anything, I would say they were more so in the way. I think that was just a lucky circumstance where we were able to get Bosco, and obviously he helped us make Invitational. But the rest of that team, none of them play anymore. My man, Gurmy, and K9, I don't think even stayed like year 3. So Bosco and myself were the last 2 remaining, and I think we were also the oldest people on that team, which is kind of funny how that works out.
So fast forward a couple of years, then you make a little roster, you get Goddess involved, and then you're picked up by Soniqs. And at that point, I think Soniqs were starting to become this big org. A lot of people had eyes on them. They're a huge org now, but they gave you time and they gave you backing. Like, that's the big thing that you want when you're a pro player, is that kind of security to do what you want. And you did go through development. The first few years wasn't really that laden with success. But in and around 2021, you finally kind of got the team I think you wanted around you and the players that you had. You know, you finished top 3 every single stage. You were qualifying for major events, and that success has kind of gone through. How was that whole experience of building and developing and growing on that team in Soniqs, especially for someone, as you keep pointing out, who was an older player in the scene even back then?
I think it was just a process because obviously, I mean, when we first joined Soniqs, we were going to have to play for Challenger League. And I think we were basically the first team Soniqs even picked up. I remember receiving a message from Darren, who's obviously now my friend and he's the CEO of the Soniqs, but he messaged me and it was something along the lines like, hey, we're a new org based out of Pennsylvania. We're very interested in signing you guys. We could offer you housing and like, you know, a good Challenger League salary. And I was just like, who the hell is this guy? Like, what is he talking? Like, you know, when you get a message like that, you're like, this guy's just talking out of his ass, basically. And then he flew me and Lauren out to Harrisburg to check everything out. And they're like, wow, this was legit. And I was just like, immediately, because at the time I had also been talking to the Sentinels who were trying to get in Rainbow too. But we saw Soniqs and I just immediately like had some connection with them. And I was like, yeah, I think this is what we do. So in a way, we could have been the Sentinels and who knows how that would have turned out. But yeah, I obviously that was the right decision. And over time, you know, coming through Challenger League, and this happens a lot in Siege, and I think this is another reason why it's good there's no more relegation. When you make Pro League, pretty much teams change almost every player on that team, or they keep like 1 or 2 players, because at the end of the day what happens is you find out a lot of these guys aren't cut out for Pro League. They're just not good enough. They don't have the right mentality, whatever it may be. So you're kind of going through a stage where you're weeding out who's going to be able to stick to the team. Obviously, we make some more changes, bring in Gomfi and Sleben from EU, which was the first international transfer in Siege. But that was also a process because they ended up not being able to play basically because of visa issues at the time. And so they're finally able to play. But it's like a relegation match, which we end up losing, but we're going to be back in NAL. So then, you know, the decision was made to replace Lauren. So we bring in Easily from Rogue, who was my teammate on Rogue. And we bring in Iconic, who was like a new player, to replace Neptunes. So you see, it's like over time, you're slowly upgrading your roster because you're building, like when you're established in a scene and you show that you're like trustworthy and that like you're a good org and like players actually like playing for you, you build up more credibility so that you're able to get better and better players. Like obviously being in Pro League helps because at the end of the day, players want to be in Pro League. So you have the option to get better players, but it's kind of continuing to try to upgrade your roster piece by piece until you find a player that you know is like, that's a player that we hang on to. And for us, it was me, basically. And we kept going through it. And obviously with that roster I just mentioned, we were okay. We got 5th place both stages. And that was an improvement for us from the previous roster where we were one of the worst teams. But what we would call the work ethic or the attitude didn't really align with how I saw things or how Darren saw things. We decided, okay, you know, we're pretty established in this league. Let's make changes again. We think this, you know, the E United core have good players, obviously. And we did go through some different trials where there was a time where we were playing with Dream instead of Yeti, and Creators instead of Kansan. And, you know, obviously through scrims and that kind of thing, you decide like, okay, maybe this isn't going to work out. And we got to where we are today, and we've continued to upgrade. You know, we're bringing in a world champion for myself. We bring in Gunner, who's like one of the best rookie players, one of the most talented younger players in the league. For Xander, we're bringing in Citizen, who's one of the best players of all time for Kansan. So it's like, now I'm looking at our roster and I'm like, yeah, this is a roster where it's like, okay, now it's pretty hard to upgrade this. This one looks like this is something we can leave alone for a while. And obviously we'll see what happens because you never know. But the number one goal of Soniqs is always we want to build winning teams. And obviously it can be a process to build winning teams because you do, like I said, you have to find the right mix of players. You have to build up the credibility to where you can land that talent. But at the end of the day, winning is going to always come above like my friendship to players or my loyalty first is to the org
Yeah.
and to winning, and then everybody else comes second. And that's just the nature of the business. I feel like I'm very straight up with every player that I've ever played with, or now that I'm the general manager, I just tell them basically how it's going to go, or what the expectations are. And if there's issues, I immediately bring that up. So there's never any kind of confusion on what's going on. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the Soniqs want to win, and I'm committed to the Soniqs. I'm committed to winning. And I think being patient and looking for the right mix of players is how you build winning teams. And obviously, we've done that in Siege. We've done that in PUBG. Hopefully, we're going to be able to do that in Rocket League. And yeah.
So the transition then from being an active player to a general manager role is an incredible achievement for you personally as well. Not very many players retire and step into management roles for massive orgs. Was that something that you had, kind of thought about before you retired? Was it something that maybe you'd spoken about? Or was it a case of you retired and then maybe the CEO approached and said, would you be interested in this? Because I'm curious as how you stepped into that role, because it is one that I know for you will provide, yourself a lot of, hopefully, stability for the future.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it wasn't something I was necessarily expecting. To be honest, I thought I would probably end up coaching. But I will say, I think over time, obviously I've built up a lot of trust with Darren, and, the Soniqs know my commitment to them. And I think they think I'm a pretty smart guy. I kind of was known, in Siege as not the most talented player, but maybe the smartest player. And I've always, in my opinion, seen, and, going back on what I was just talking about, how I'm always thinking work first and not necessarily in friendships and like trying to build teams. I would say I've almost always thought of the game at more of a management level, like even as a player. And it was maybe not a great power dynamic, but like on the Siege team, when I was playing, everybody on that team knew that I was the person making the decisions for the team. Like, and yeah, that's maybe like a little bit not of a great, like, nobody could really say anything to me, because it's like, you don't want to piss him off because that guy can kick you off the team. Not that it was ever like that, but I've just always kind of thought, I would say, in a management level way. And it kind of aligned to when because the Soniqs knew I was going to retire. I let them know months ahead so that we were prepared. And it just kind of aligned that when I was going to retire, Darren had been promoted to the CEO and needed someone to become the general manager while he dealt, with more higher level things. Obviously, the main job of a general manager is to make sure all the players are on track, make sure the teams are doing well, negotiate contracts, all that kind of stuff. And I've been in esports so long, honestly, I don't know that there's many people who have more of a understanding of players and how teams work than I do. So it's kind of a natural fit. And obviously I'm still learning some things as I go, just because, dealing with agents, for instance, that kind of thing, like that's not something that I've really had to deal with before. But I just think it was like a natural transition and it lined up. And obviously I care a lot about the Soniqs. Darren cares a lot about the Soniqs. Luke, our director of operations, cares a lot about the Soniqs. So the goal at the end of the day is to turn the Soniqs into the best, winningest org we can. And we all have that shared mindset.
Yeah, well, I know that Whippet, my cast and Geo, we had this big conversation in Yonchiping, and we were like, Soniqs are an org that we think are doing things right. It's an org that we think could be the team in NA that goes on to be the dominant side, because I think NA is lacking at the national level a team that comes out on top all the time. It's always a different team, different teams going to majors, and we think you guys can be the one that maybe change that along with a few others in NA. But I want to talk about the transfers now and contracts, because it's been a good year for Soniqs. You signed, as you said, Geo, who I've had the pleasure of meeting in person. I think he's an absolute gentleman outside of the server. Really nice guy, and I think he's somebody that you want in your team for personality alone, never mind the talent he brings. When you found out he was available, how quickly did you have to move? Because obviously he becomes available. He's a current world champion. A lot of people in NA are going to be wanting to pick him up, regardless of whether they have an open spot in their roster or not.
Well, Gio and I have a really good relationship. I would say he's probably my best friend within Siege. And to be quite frank, I think that if you're a free agent player and you have the opportunity to be on Soniqs, that's who you'd want to be on. We, in my opinion, have probably the two best players in the region at that time. And, we're even expanding more of that now with Citizen. But yeah, it was a thing where, so we already had purchased the contract of Gunner to replace me. And there were some role issues because obviously I was a hard support player. Gunner is more of a fragger. And there were some issues with like thinking who is going to move into my role? Was it going to be Kansan? Was it going to be Yeti? Because at that time, Yeti was having a really hard time. Obviously now he's playing much better for SSG, but Xander was having a really hard time statistically. We had like a stat that said over like 38 matches, he had only gone positive like 5 times. So he was in like a real like slump, and that's who I wanted to go on Breach. And then we began to have concerns because of Yeti's play style, if that would work. And I believe he had also mentioned to Gunner that he wanted Gunner to play Breach. And I know the team didn't want that. So when Gio becomes available, who's a world champion hard support, has all of that experience, which I think is extremely important. Losing somebody like me who has a lot of experience, who's more of a even-tempered person, who's not going to get like flustered in a game. I thought it was important to have somebody like that in the lobby. Gunner's a rookie player. He's not going to have that level of experience or that level of calmness just because of his experience. It's no shot at him, of course. It's just the nature of how things work. So Gio becomes available. This is like an easy, like, Gio replaces me. That's a direct upgrade. Obviously, whatever you want to say about me, Gio's just in terms of a player. He's a better player than me. He's a world champion, second winningest player of all time. And in our opinion, Gunner's a better player than Yeti. He brings a different outlook. He's more moldable. And it kind of was just like, okay, we just have to get this done. So obviously we first make sure that there's a deal that's possible with TSM. We discover that, okay, we can make this work. And yeah, I mean, it was done in about 2 days. Because I know Gio had been contacted by some other teams, but I also knew that Gio would prefer to play for us over any of those other teams.
Yeah, and then your Infinity Gauntlet was completed when you make the transfer of Citizen, and that was a big one, an international transfer from one huge org to another one, and it's one, as the saga went on and on and on social media. I think people caught wind of it pretty early. You had the R6 leakers page, which you had a little laugh with yourself on Twitter, but how does a deal like that come around? Because it is an international transfer, so things become a little bit different when it comes, talking to the teams, talking to players, if there's agents involved. The move for Citizen, how did that all come around?
So yeah, obviously in terms of Citizen, there had been international transfers within Siege, but never to a player of his level. And it's kind of funny because as I mentioned in kind of the Soniqs like Twitter announcement that we do, where it's like an update, I actually wanted Citizen to replace me originally after Invite last year, so a year ago, and G2 basically like laughed at us. But essentially what happened was, and this was again a pure coincidence, after the major was completed, the team basically told me that they did not want to play with Evan anymore. It was obviously not a skill issue. I think it was just like with the new players, with Gio and Gunner, his personality didn't mesh well with theirs, whereas with me and Xander, he fit in with our personalities. So it was just unfortunate. And around that time that the team decided they wanted to bench Gunner, we received an email from G2, which I believe they sent to probably every team, and it just said, hey, if anyone is interested, they listed some players and these guys are available. So obviously I'm like, well, I guess that's an option. Now, again, I don't know how realistic that is because obviously for a player like Citizen, there's a hefty price tag. But I messaged them and I was having some talks with them while we were trialing other players, going back and forth with Darren about what was, a reasonable number for us to do here. And basically what it came down to was we trialed with Citizen a couple times just to get an idea of how he fit into our team, because there were some role questions there. And he did have, I don't necessarily think it's 100% the case, but there were part of the reason I believe that he was available was just because he didn't get along well with their current iteration of the G2 team. And so that led him to be available, but he seems to fit in fine with us, obviously. So we had a couple trials with him, and everyone was like, yeah, this guy he's just on another level than everybody else we're trying out. And I agreed. So then it just became to more of a discussion of, can we find a number that G2 and Soniqs are both comfortable on? Obviously, we did find that, and then we have to consider, okay, now that we have this number with them, let's think about the other commitment. We're going to have to pay, depending on who we pick up. Obviously, you're paying Citizen a higher salary than a rookie player or somebody like that. We are going to have to pay for his visa, going to have to move him here. Like, there's a lot more of a commitment that goes into a player like Citizen than it would have been like for Mr. B, for instance. But our goal, as I said earlier in this interview, is to always win. And if I'm looking at it just on a clear analytical, clear take your emotions out of it point of view, Citizen, anybody else, Citizen is the clear better player. And he fit into what we're trying to do, so it wasn't a role question. So at that point, we just decide that's the move we're going to make. We want to keep upgrading the team. We don't want to side grade or potentially downgrade with an experienced player from Kansan, who's obviously a really good player himself. And yeah, I mean, it just kind of aligned that it worked, but it wasn't necessarily smooth sailing, I would say. It just, we were able to agree on a deal and make it happen.
Yeah, and just over, or less than a month's time, we're going to get to see this Sonic Super team in action. Pardon the pun, by the way. I'm sorry I do this way too often. But no, genuinely, I like the pickups that you've made. It is, as you said, the first time we've seen a huge international transfer. We've seen it before, but I think this is one that not only could change your roster's future, but I think it could have a big impact down the line too. Now that that kind of bubble has been bust of the first big transfer, we might start to see players jump between regions a little bit more. And I want to step away from Siege now for a little bit and talk a little bit more about the organization. And the first thing is Sonic socials. So one of my favorite things about Sonics and the social media team is the fact that they're happy to self-deprecate with jokes. They have a little bit of fun. Some orgs can come across as a little uptight and not afraid to do that.
Yeah.
How did the decision come about where you guys just say, you know what, have fun, as long as you're not doing anything that you shouldn't do on socials, as long as it's fun, go for it? Like, is that a scary decision to make as a GM, or is it just something that you think needs to be done more?
I will say, in regards to socials, I have like some input on some of the things we're doing or saying, but I'm not necessarily like, I'm not sitting there tweeting for us, or we'd probably be making fun of a lot more people. But yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of a collective hive mind with that, and we don't mind poking fun of ourselves. I do think sometimes maybe we go a little too far with poking fun of ourselves, because at the end of the day, if you lose and you're making fun of yourself, you don't want to make the players feel awkward about it. But yeah, I think it's just finding like a good mix and match of when to be serious, when to kind of be a little bit trolly on Twitter or whatever other socials. And yeah, I think our social medias are fine.
Yeah, it is fun. And then I think another thing about Sonics, you've got a lot of very good people behind the scenes. Another person that you have working for you is obviously Joe, and he's, I believe, the head analyst now for Sonics. And doesn't that role, if I'm not wrong, go over all esports, not just Siege? So yeah, how important is it that all these teams, your Siege team, your PUBG team, that they have the right staff in the background? They've got the right analysts, they've got the right coaching, the players' welfare is being looked after. Because obviously you've played at a high level, you know how stressful it can be. How much of that kind of professionalizing the lifestyle of esports are you trying to bring in as well with all these moves?
Well, Joe's actually been, because as we've seen his analytics that we were able to develop in terms of into like a SQ rating system, actually ended up being pretty beneficial for us in Siege. It ended up being pretty accurate, where I think even the players would trust the SQ ratings over like Siege GG. So our goal with moving Joe to the the head analytical role was to develop this system for our other teams for in other games and even for uses beyond that. But yeah, I think it's very important, especially when, like, for me, for instance, as a general manager, I know Siege like the back of my hand. I probably know Siege more than any other person. But if you're asking me to what players do I want in Rocket League, like I need something to be able to evaluate. I have to have coaching staff that I can trust in terms of the thoughts on the players available, the players on our team, the analytics that Joe is working to provide us that are going to give us more of an in-depth understanding of, players that are maybe overrated, underrated, coming up, that kind of thing. Because that stuff's all very important, especially in games where you're not necessarily as established or you're not necessarily an expert in. Which, to be honest, in PUBG and Rainbow, the Soniqs are, I don't really think we have to worry about that. We know it pretty well. And these other games we branch out into, like Valorant or Rocket League or anything down the line, it's harder to find the right mix and match of players because we don't necessarily have as great of an understanding of it yet. But that's what analytics and that's what hiring the right coaching staff can help you do.
Yeah. And you touched on the PUBG roster, and I think the big thing about the PUBG roster is they are dominant in NA. It's either them or the XE United roster, but most of the time it's Soniqs. And they've had international success that's been a little bit waning over the last 2 years. But not only that, the players are kind of icons in their game. You have people who average 2,000 plus viewers every time they hit that go live button.
Yeah.
How important is it for you that those players balance, being big on Twitch, being big on socials, and with competing to get the job done? Because as you said, your goal as general manager is to win, and you want to make sure that these players are in that position to win in the likes of PUBG.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest and say that I personally do not care at all if you average 1 viewer or 10,000 viewers. Obviously, in terms of your compensation, it probably helps you because if you're more popular, you make more money, whether it's through your contract, which isn't always the case, but essentially, like, obviously through Twitch and other kinds of means. So I do think it is important, and it's obviously something that we've discussed because our team does have popular streamers. Even when I was playing, I was like decently a popular streamer, or still am. It's you can still be a streamer and you can still do all of this. And for like a player like Tig, for instance, he just streams himself playing PUBG like 10 hours a day. So at the end of the day, is that really hurting? No, he's just playing the game, and it helps. It's one of the reasons it's one of the best players in the world. But you do have to be careful of, you are a player first. You're a competitive player first. That should be your main focus, like practice and making sure you're doing that. And your stream should be second or whatever it is there. And there does come a point for a lot of players where it's like, well, I'm making way more money streaming than playing. I don't really see the point of playing anymore. And at that point, a lot of people are playing for like the love of it. Like I could use in Rainbow Six, like Bolo, for an example. Truthfully, Bolo does not need to play Rainbow Six Siege competitive. He won SI already. He's accomplished essentially winning the Super Bowl. If Bolo just wanted to step aside and stream and do YouTube, he would be perfectly fine making, an insane amount of money. So at that point, when you're playing, it's because you really want to, you love playing. And as long as you have that love for playing and you want to be, being competitive and that kind of thing, then you stick with it. But when you kind of start waning on that, when you're kind of thinking I'd rather be streaming right now or that kind of thing, that's when you have to kind of sit down and be real with yourself or real with like the team or the org and just say like, I don't think my heart is necessarily in this as much anymore. Do you guys want me to keep playing, or do you want me to just step aside? Because I'll keep playing, but I'm more focused on my stream these days. And sometimes players can be, I'm not saying this is the case with Bolo necessarily, but how much when you're a millionaire from playing a game, how much do you really care about wanting to sit there every day and grind practice and all of that when you could just be, if you're practicing 8 hours a day, you're just practicing. You're not getting, you get your salary, but if you're streaming for 8 hours a day, think about how much money you're potentially losing out on by doing that. And it does come down to a decision for every player who's built a good social for themselves at some point.
I think it's a reflection of whether they're a competitor or whether they feel like they've achieved everything that they want to and they're focusing on their long-term stability. And I like it whenever players compete. To me, it's you want to be the best. And I think sitting on Twitch and earning a lot of money is nice. But I think for the likes of Bolo too, he's won a world championship. He can kind of say that. But, you never know what could happen in the future. But I want to step away from esports in general and talk a bit more about you, Supr. So, obviously, your job is pretty stressful now. You're responsible for multiple teams. And how do you decompress? So when you're not gaming, when you're not doing work with Soniqs, which I'm sure even whenever you're off, you're probably thinking about stuff. But how do you step away from all that? And what do you like to get up to in your spare time?
I'll be honest, I don't. If I'm not dealing with Sonic stuff, I'm worrying about the Rainbow Six Siege team because it's just inherently built in me that, it might be a little bit of the control freak in me, but I have to make sure that those guys are doing well and that I think we know what's going on. And then if I finally am able to say, okay, they don't really need my help, then I stream because, obviously I have, which is kind of awkward as like a GM, but I have a stream where I average, 1,200 viewers or so. So that's pretty much all my time. And then, watch an hour or so of TV every day. But yeah, I mean, it's essentially all Sonics or like streaming most of my days. I don't really, I've always been wired that way. Like even when I was playing, it was 24/7 Siege. I would scrim, I would watch every VOD, I would make every strat, and I would, stream Siege. So the idea of just like not doing something related to my main job, I guess you'd say, is not something that really crosses my mind. Well, I don't really find it like stressful, I guess you'd say. I just find it as what I should be doing.
Yeah. Well, look, I think as we're about to wrap up, the last thing I want to say is, do you have anything you want to say to the Sonics fans out there ahead of SI?
I think the super fans out there would prefer me to go with that meme where I just say no. Or they asked me at Invitational, do you have anything to say to the fans? And I just said no. But yeah, obviously, hopefully the Sonics at SI make it far enough to where we can play on the stage in front of fans. If so, I will be there. And if you want photos, autographs, whatever, don't be afraid to come up and ask. And yeah, let's hopefully root for the team and see what we look like with Citizen. Obviously, we are only coming into this with like a month of practice, basically, because it was a recent transfer. But I'm very encouraged by what I've been seeing and the level of talent on our team. And I have, everybody here at Sonics has great hope that we can go far at SI, do better than we did last year.
Yeah, well, I'll make sure that get out. But Supr, what can I say? It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. For you personally, I wish you nothing but success in your role with Sonics, because obviously your success means success for the org too. And hopefully, if everything goes well, I'll see you at SI.
Hopefully.
Take care. Thank you.